70, like 70. He's like, yeah, 70 units. And I was like, how the hell did you do that? Talking about other people's money, talking about a mentor, talking about seller carryback financing, all these things that I'd heard of in seminars and in books. But he's now a guy who's now set the bar, i.e. the universe saying, this is now your new ceiling.
If you're an active real estate investor and you're looking to do larger deals, you're in the right place. We are going to go and take the conceptual type of stuff that you listen to from other real estate podcasts and bring it down to the tactical, the nitty gritty, the actual actionable types of things that other real estate investors that went big did to grow their own real estate empire. You're listening to the Go Big Live podcast. I'm your host, Matt Drouin. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Go Big Live Real Estate Investors Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Drouin. I have a really special guest today that I'm like trying to not fanboy over. His name is Reed Goossens. I originally got to following Reed because I was on a call with a guy by the name of Joe Fairless. If you haven't heard of Joe Fairless before, if Reed is the Greek god of multifamily investing, or one of them, Joe is like one of the titans. And I was actually on a sales call with him. I was trying to, be one of his coaching clients or mentees, and I totally blew it. Like he had a bunch of homework for me to do before our call, and I didn't prepare for it. I jumped on it, and it's like, dude, you might want to get your shit together before, you want to, book a sales call in terms of getting into multifamily. And he's like, hey, why don't you check out this guy, Reed? He runs a podcast called Investing in the US. So I've been following Reed for a really long time. So a little bit of background on Reed. Before coming across a little purple book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Reed spent over 9 years as a civil structural engineer, where he was involved in the infrastructure development of the 2021 Summer Olympics. After a huge move to the US in 2012, Reed's full-time real estate journey began. He purchased his first property for $38,000 in all cash and now controls over $705 million worth of commercial real estate. Reed's multifamily syndication investment firms have certainly made a significant impact in the industry. From the challenges he faced to the rewards he reaped along the way, you won't want to miss this opportunity to learn from one of the best in the industry and ask your questions live. Welcome to the show, Reed.
Matt, thanks for having me, brother. And it's good to reconnect. Thanks for that trip down memory lane. I do remember, was that 2015, 16 maybe?
Yeah, maybe something like that. Sounds about right.
Yeah. I know. I follow you back on Instagram, man. So I see all the cool things you're doing. So it's cool to see that you're taking the next big steps. And but thanks for having me. I'm really pumped to be here and trying to give some insights and some knowledge to the listeners.
Absolutely. So I like to start the show with, Reed, you were born and now you're here. Mm-hmm. What happened in between at a high level?
Yes, born, now I'm here. Look, I think grew up in Australia, grew up with two pretty much working class family, my parents were both teachers, instilled in me the value of a dollar from a young age, 14 years of age when I could legally go and work in Australia. I was trying to get my, first paycheck. And from there, through different things, my dad was a mathematics teacher, and he also was a deputy principal in my high school. He always really instilled in me like a work ethic. But, I'm from a state school, I'm a state school raised kid. I didn't go to any private schools. I know the value of a dollar, and I went to uni, and my dad was always like, look, you got to study hard and, get some sort of paper behind you. And I went and got an engineering degree. It was a great degree to study. I love the problem solving of it. But when I got into the workforce, it was a pretty getting smacked in the face. You were like a very small cog in a big machine. And it was fortunate to be able to work across the globe. You mentioned 2021. It was actually 2012 Summer Games in London that I worked on in 2008, which was really cool, straight out of uni. But then I sort of had more, that itch that a lot of entrepreneurs or young mid-20s people have, is like, look, there's got to be more to life than just doing this for the next 40 years of my life. And I had done some backpacking around the globe. I'd worked on a super yacht for a Russian billionaire. As have you ever seen the show Below Deck? I cruised across the Atlantic Ocean, back in 2009. I met my now wife backpacking on the beaches in Spain when I was gallivanting around the South. So a lot of things have happened over the years to bring me to the US, because that was the whole reason why I came here. It was through a itch to do something more. It was through challenging myself to move to another country. It was through, trying to chase this girl. And I really moved here, Matt, just to be an engineer and an expat for a couple of years. And I didn't have a job when I moved here. The worst thing was like I'd move back to Australia where my family was from and get another engineering job. But lo and behold, you mentioned earlier, I was already bitten by the bug after reading Rich Dad Poor Dad for real estate investing back in 2009, 2010. And then I didn't end up moving to the US till 2012 to chase Erica, my wife. And then within 6 months, I'd bought my first property in Syracuse, New York for $39,000 triplex. And, you just can't buy that stuff in Australia. So that was sort of the start. And there was, today I've just formed 2 syndication companies, over 700 million of acquisitions to date. We've sold 6 or 7 deals, we've come full cycle. So the total portfolio, as if you look at from a gross perspective, is over 4,000 units. So obviously we don't operate all 4,000 today, but that's what we do. The team's pretty lean, and there's a whole bunch of stories in there that I can talk about, in between, and trying to inspire people on the call to take action. So yeah.
Absolutely. No, that's awesome, Reed. I want to kind of rewind back a little bit because, $38,000 property in Syracuse, New York, and Syracuse is about an hour and a half away from where we are right now.
Yep.
Very similar demographics. What were you thinking at the time where you were like, $38,000, what could possibly go wrong? I'm buying this so cheap.
Yeah, look, I was living in New York City at the time, as I mentioned, and I was going to the RIA events there, and I couldn't afford New York City, right? I'd only saved up some money from my corporate job, and I was like, how can I buy the most amount of units with the least amount of money? And Syracuse was a market that I think someone else in the group in the RIA was starting to buy up there, like not turnkey, but like kind of producing turnkey, a British fella. And I just remember going, well, look, I can get on a Greyhound bus. I can get up there 4 hours up, spend 2 hours on the ground. The broker would come pick me up from the Greyhound bus station, and then I'd get back on the bus and go back down to New York City and be able to be home by Saturday night. So I remember doing that for a good 4 to 6 months to figure out that market up there. And I tell you what, like that first deal had had a drive-by shooting at it. Had all the things that could go wrong. But it was it's not about smacking your first deal out of the park. It's about just getting, off home plate, as they like to say here in the States. And that helped me. You don't get to deal number 10 without doing deal number 1. I think that's really, really important to have somewhere to start, and everyone's going to have a starting point. And you get to that point where you get analysis paralysis, and you go to the seminars and all that stuff. And then eventually at some point you got to be like, all right, let's go do some actual work. And that was sort of the start of what has led down to a pretty awesome career so far.
Excellent. So, I'm just curious. You kind of have a similar origin from small single multifamily to the big deals, just like Joe Farrell's. I think Joe had maybe 3 single family or 4 single family houses in Texas or whatever. Like, who gave you permission to go big? And then 2, what was that seminal moment? How did that happen? Because most people think, oh, I'm going to buy a 3-plex, I'm going to buy a 4-plex, I'm going to buy another 2-family. And then at some point in time, the universe is going to give me permission to, do the deals that the big boys and big girls do.
Yeah, no, I love how you say universe gives you permission, because looking back on it, it was that exact thing. And so it was actually in New York City. I think it was end of 2013. I'd bought 2 properties in Syracuse, and I was buying my third fix and flip, the first fix and flip in Philly. And so I'd probably had 6 little units, under my name. And I met up with a buddy in New York City, Scott Reese. I'm actually going to his 40th birthday in Canada next month. And he's a good friend that I studied at university back, my civil engineering degree back in Australia. He came out and was a couple of years older than me. He was doing an exchange. And I remember being 17 years of age, meeting this Canadian fellow, and we became mates ever since. So he's in New York City. I'm talking to him about these great little deals I'm buying up in upstate New York. And he's, that's fantastic, Reed, good on you. And he's a civil engineer as well. And he goes on to tell me about how he bought a 70 unit. And I said, a 70, like 70? He's like, yeah, 70 units. And I was like, how the hell did you do that? Talking about other people's money, talking about a mentor, talking about seller carryback financing, all these things that I'd heard of in seminars and in books. But he's now a guy who's now set the bar, i.e. the universe saying, this is now your new ceiling, right? This is now your new bar. You need to jump. And I said, well, if Scott can do it, why can't I? And that's when I went out and found Joe Fellis. And that's where I hunted down. And Joe I think Joe had only done one deal at that time. Like, he was extremely cheap. I think he's third or fourth student back in the day. And this was 2014. So it was really, really early. So yeah, that was the moment that I was like, okay, I see you, Scott. All right, let's go. If he can do it, I can do it. And so, and that was the looking back, that was the sort of the spark or the catalyst to make me sort of push those boundaries a little bit more and make me start upping my game.
Absolutely. So what was like, so you made the decision to do this. You partnered up with a coach/mentor. What were the steps from there? I mean, did you start going out and looking at deals? How did you determine your market? Like kind of like the origin of maybe where this first opportunity that you landed came about?
Yeah. So the first actually true opportunity came from, so Joe was very influential in starting my own podcast, Investing in the US, which is the book behind me. That was in 2014 to sort of start the getting the word out in the street about what you do. At the same point, I moved to Los Angeles, where I am now, where my wife is from. And I was working as a structural engineer. And I was like, I need to start a small meetup because I kind of always knew that if you had a microphone and you're standing on stage and you could provide a platform for people to meet, that would ultimately help you, right? Mm-hmm. So I remember starting these things called Wind Down Wednesday, and it was in these, it was as co-working was starting to come up. Mm-hmm. And so co-working spaces would be able to give me the space for free to come in for a couple of hours, but everyone would bring their own wine and would just bring cheese and dip, and it'd be a real estate thing. Through that event, I met Joe's now partner, Frank Rosler. Mm-hmm. And I met Frank. He was still working, and he was still working for another company, and he had brought this, I think it was 200 units, a 2004 build or something like that in Houston, Texas. It was a 7 cap. And I remember taking it to Joe, and like he was, Frank was like, I need help raising this money. And I was like, look, I've got this mentor who apparently can raise money. Like you guys should definitely chat. And I think Joe said no originally. And it was through Frank being like, no, I need to take this deal down. And I was just playing the delivery, the messenger. Yeah. And I was like, look, I'm just getting started in this coaching program. I've just started the podcast. I'll try my best to raise a little bit of money, but I'm not going to be able to raise much. Joe's your boy. Mm-hmm. And I think after a bit of persuasion, Joe said yes. And they got the deal done somehow. And they've gone on to form Ashcroft Capital, and I happen to be involved in a couple of their early deals. Mm-hmm. But that was sort of the kismet of being a co-GP in the story. Now, I went on to do my own deals, and both Joe and Frank were very influential in helping me launch off and do that, be a lead sponsor, and they helped KP deals. So it was all sort of came full circle eventually. And those guys have gone off now. They're $2 or $3 billion under management. So at Ashcroft Capital. So stories like that don't come, like you can't write that. And it's a little bit to what you said earlier, let the universe sort of bring you opportunities and sort of just not have things sort of, like set in stone that this needs to be the path, right? Mm-hmm. There's so many different ways you can skin the cat. And if you have your blinkers on, you'll miss them, right? And sometimes things will present themselves and you won't understand till looking back, nearly approaching 10 years later, that was the catalyst to, what things can change in life. So yeah, really, really, really cool story. And those guys are just absolutely crushing it. And I know every time I go to Best Ever or I see Frank, and I've had Joe a couple of times on the podcast, it's just, it's good to see those boys just absolutely go from strength to strength. Yeah.
So Reed, let's talk about maybe your first deal that you brought, full circle, where you were, I guess like, maybe not that deal, but something that
the lead sponsor.
Lead. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So 2015, started the decision to say, like, I think I was co-raising, and I wasn't raising a lot for Joe and Frank, but I was raising what I could, back in the day. But I had that sort of, again, that sort of itch on the back of the neck to be like, I want to be my own sponsor. I don't want to just keep raising capital. This is not where the money's at. There's not great money, but I wanted to do more. I being a structural engineer, And at the time I was working for a developer in Los Angeles. So I was sort of living and breathing real estate because I couldn't leave the day job or corporate America because I didn't have my green card yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I needed to keep being employed, but then I made the executive decision to go and join a development company. So I was like, from my engineering days to my working with the developer, like I was always coming through call it the tools, if that makes sense. Like I wasn't coming through the finance world or Wall Street. I was coming through engineering and the tools and how to build stuff. So being an operator was always sort of like in my blood, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so eventually it was like, well, I need to start looking at deals. And that was when I first got the VAs were a thing. And I remember saying to myself, because I was working full time, trying to have, obviously a relationship with my girlfriend, trying to do the podcast, like trying to, I think I was still doing the wind down Wednesdays, like just trying to throw all the spaghetti against the wall.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, I'm not underwriting, I'm not underwriting enough. And I went and got 2 kids from USC undergrads at I think $15 an hour. And they were starting to help me underwrite deals through one of the models that Frank Roessler had actually taught me.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just trying to like outsource and get deals. And I actually landed on Central Texas, San Antonio. And it was just the cap rate was more advantageous down there, and met up with another guy who was local boots on the ground. So I had sort of the underwriting done, or not done, but like I had that sort of system built out. But I was like, well, I couldn't get away. I couldn't get down to Central Texas and tour all these deals. I need someone local to tour deals, and that's where I met my first business partner. And ultimately, he didn't come from the background that I came from, and he was sort of the yin to my yang, and we were able to go off and tie up a 192-unit deal, which in San Antonio. It was a $16 million acquisition. We had to raise $6.8 million.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I tell you what, I got a gray spot in the back of my head, and that's from that deal. I can remember it vividly, and sleepless nights, but we got it done. And here we are today, 24 syndications later. So, yeah.
So that 192-unit deal. All right. So you got under contract, right?
Mm-hmm.
When did you how did you raise the money for that deal? Because that's that's a big raise for, doing it, for your first time as a lead. Like,
yep.
How did you do that, and how did you structure that?
Yeah, it was like the structure was, we had co-GPs like coming out of the Joe and Frank model,
mm-hmm.
and everyone had a role and responsibility, but everyone was ultimately responsible for bringing capital into the deal.
Mm-hmm.
I think I ended up raising 1.3, 1.4. My business partner raised probably roughly the same, says 3. We had a couple other people come in who signed on the loan, but also then subsequently raised like $500,000-$600,000. So there's another probably 1.5. So you're sort of cobbling together like 4.5. Again, we need to get to 6. We had then the first iteration of crowdfunding was back in the day. And I remember we went out to a group who was supposed to raise sort of like the remaining 1.5. And I don't know if I can swear on this podcast, but they ultimately shut the bed, and they didn't raise a dime. And we were getting agency financing on this deal, so we didn't actually need the 6.8 to close. That part of the 6.8 was closing costs,
mm-hmm. acquisition
acquisition fees, and capex. Mm-hmm. Over $1 million worth of capex. So I remember talking to Joe, and being like, "Man, we're this group has sort of shut the bed, so to speak, like 2 weeks before we were supposed to close." And I remember at the end of DD, Matt, only having 50% of it raised, mm-hmm. and going, let's throw that dice and we'll somehow figure it out. And lo and behold, so this group, we said, we were like, because I remember Joe saying to me, just calculate how much you need to close. And I think what we needed to close, it was around 4.8 mil or 4.9. So we were like sniffing really close to, I think we're at 4.5. So we're really, really close.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about Joe was my mentor at the time. He was talking about like, maybe you could get a quick, small hard money loan just to bridge the gap, blah, 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 keep raising.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden I'm at my day job at the development company, and I get this phone call from this guy. And I was like, "Hi, this is Reed, and who's this?" And it ended up being this investor who wanted to invest. Him and his brother wanted to invest $1.3 million.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, "How the hell did you get the deck?" And someone through one of the financing companies we were using on the debt had accidentally sent it out to the entire emailing list. And again, you can't write this stuff. And it was just like right time, right place, kismet, whatever you want to call it, woo-woo-ness, the universe. And these brothers come in for 1.3 million bucks, and ultimately we've gone on to do another bigger deal with them, and they were just they filled the hole, and I was just like, wow.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even like, wow. I thank you, whoever's looking down upon me, but we ended up raising it before we needed to close, and we got it all done, and we ended up selling that deal just last year. We made everyone like a 1.9 on their money. And that was with a defeasance. We had because we got I think it was a 7 or a 10-year term on the Freddie. Mm-hmm. And we had a 5-year business plan. So as newbie operators, we locked that interest rate, but we didn't think about the defeasance on the end. And, here we are today. So we survived it, and it wasn't for the faint-hearted by any stretch of the means, but we got it done. And, again, these weird stories that come out of it is like, wow, how did that even happen?
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. So how did you raise your part of the deal? Like in the beginning there, you had these guys that came in, that were like the, knights in shining armor at the last minute, but how did you raise that first 1.3 that you were responsible for?
Yeah, that was through the podcast, and that was through doing small raises for Joe and Frank, leading up to that point. I think I'd done 3 with them. Mm-hmm. In the, so it was late 2015, early 16. So yeah, early 15 and late 14 when they got together. I think they did 2 or 3 deals in the early on, and I was raising $500,000, 300,000. So I'd started prepping my people for that. And it's interesting, Matt, when you're the lead of your own deal, so much more comes. And I don't know what it was, but I was surprised, to be honest, because now I'm the lead. It was like people like, oh, okay, great. Thank God. Like, I was always trusting you earlier, but I wasn't really sure about who these other people were. Mm-hmm. Now you're the lead. Let's go. So yeah, I think the average that I was raising prior to that was probably $500,000 per deal, and it nearly tripled just because I was the lead on the first deal. So that was an interesting statistic as well. And not that my audience had grown substantially in that time. It hadn't. I was still a very small audience. So it's very interesting looking back on that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, capital raising is definitely a big component of the real estate, investing industry, whether you're in multifamily or not. I mean, I happen to be in the office space. People think I'm crazy for that, but I'm a contrarian. So what things have you learned as a capital raiser in terms of habits that you now employ in your kind of like daily, weekly, monthly routine?
Yeah, a lot. I think early on, I remember one of the lessons raising for one of Joe and Frank's early deals was, I think I was tasked with raising $500,000. And this was like the second deal, I think it was, or the first, I can't even remember. It was really early on. And I remember having like, I think 100 people on the CRM, whatever. And the CRM was literally just an Excel spreadsheet in Google Sheets. Like, it wasn't anything fancy. And I'm like, I'm going to crush this. I'm easily going to be able to get 500. And I went out and I pitched, like I sent it out, and I ended up pitching like 30 or 40 investors, either via direct email or try to get them on a phone call or whatever. And I ended up raising $150,000. And it was a cold shower of, I wasn't doing enough to keep the fire stoked. Mm-hmm. And that was a real change in like, okay, I need to start doing the monthly newsletter. I need to start putting more effort into the podcast and doing that sort of stuff. And trust me, Matt, even at that stage, I didn't really know what I was doing. Now, today, the systems I have in place is through trial and error from what I wasn't doing well in the past. And for the longest period of time, I hated doing my monthly newsletter, right? But I knew I needed to keep it out and keep being relevant. So today, what the system looks like is we have a CRM, we use HubSpot, we're actually hiring a head of equity sales. We have a monthly newsletter that goes out. We have professional editors and podcast editors who be able to put out the social media clips and all that sort of stuff. And we probably could do more, like we've got ghostwriters who do these newsletters, and we probably could even do even more than what we're doing. But it's you constantly are evolving and learning the different ways that we're doing Facebook ads right now. That's a big thing that's changed over the last probably 2 years. And we've raised a couple of $1 million from Facebook ads, so, but it wasn't without having the platform of investing in the US first. and having a bit of a track record to then say, like, you're not just a newbie coming out and chucking a bunch of money at Facebook and hoping raising a bunch of, millions and millions of dollars. So it's been methodical in the way that we've evolved. We've got funnels now. We have drip campaigns, stuff that I always knew I wanted, but I never knew how to go and do it. And now I've been able to have the capital, because we've sold a few deals, to go off and, what I said earlier, I'm the operator, but I know I need these other things in the tool belt, and I need to hire the right people to go do it. Because I know in the beginning, when you're a solo entrepreneur, you try and figure it all out, and it just was like too much brain damage. Like I just don't care about I don't care, but I don't want to care about how going and creating ClickFunnels. Like, I know I need it, but someone else needs to go do it. So so it looks a lot different today, and I'm sure it's going to look a lot different in the next 10 years as we keep progressing. So yeah, 100%.
So you were able to raise the capital in just amount of time. So let's advance a little bit further. You closed the deal. What happened next?
Yes, to close the deal, got straight to work. We sort of fell into our lanes. My former business partner and I, we were just doing, what was best. I again, coming from that construction engineering background, I went straight into the value add improvements. We had to replace siding and get, it was the still to this. I know we've done one other deal. If you ever see those multifamilies where like they got that beigey ready brick, and then like the hardy siding, we went and completely painted all that brick gray and did a really whole new color tones, and it would completely transform the property. Rebranded it, did the leasing center up, did the fitness center up, and got into operations. And I wasn't specifically an asset manager in my previous life, but I was a project manager on ground up construction. And so very similar type of things, like managing people and managing expectations. And I learned a lot. We had to, I think a year into that deal, we had to fire the property management company, just wasn't doing well. There's just things you learn being in the saddle that you can only learn by being in the saddle. So many people ask me, like, how do you be a better asset manager? It's like, look, you can read about the stuff, but until you manage the day-to-day of an actual deal, and every deal is the same, but every deal will be slightly different because they'll have a slightly different problem, you'll just learn things. And one of the big things I've learned in this industry is, like, whether you're managing equity, which is people, banking relationships, lender relationships, broker relationships, investor relationships, and management relationships or vendor relationships, it's all are in the people management space. So learning to set the expectations, drive the ship in a way that's not like a dictator, but more of a leader, has been one of the hardest skills to acquire, but can only come by having time in that saddle. So that deal, we ended up selling for a lovely little profit. I think we bought it at $82,000. We ended up selling it last year for $140,000 a door. So, sorry, $82,000 a door. We've sold it for $142,000 a door, 5.5 years later, 6 years later. So really, really awesome little deal that was able to produce all my investors. And it was really great to see. And I actually wrote an article back in the day on like the 5 things I learned. And I dug up that article and I wrote another article, like the first deal to go full cycle. And I'd already gone full cycle on a couple of other deals, but this was the first deal that I led. That was my baby that went full cycle. And that was quite a nice moment to say, look, I achieved what I set out to do. And I'm so grateful for the investors to taking the leap of faith with me. And thank you very much for that. So yeah.
Oh, 100%. That's awesome, Reed. We're going to be wrapping up the recorded part of this interview pretty soon. But in terms of parting notes here, in terms of your advice for real estate investors that maybe own a few small investment properties that are looking to scale into larger deals, like what's your advice for them to kind of position themselves to make that leap?
If I can do it, you can do it. If a guy from Australia can do it, who had green card problems and visa problems, you guys can do it as well. So just sometimes it takes someone else from outside, because we don't have, just to grow on it, multifamily doesn't exist on the scale. It doesn't exist at all, full stop. There's a little bit in Canada, but there's not in Europe. You can't go out and buy 250 units garden style apartment in France or Germany or England. You can't buy it in Australia. And so the US is very unique in the fact that multifamily is, one, cheap in terms of housing, and that's by design because the government's not it's not in the housing sector. So, and then again, if I can do it, you can do it. It's all about having the belief, having the right people around you to upscale where you want to be. So I think if you're taking some notes along the way, there's obviously been mentors. There's been surrounding yourself with other people, trying to become a thought leader in your space through podcasting and or doing events, and then trying to cultivate a good CRM. And it's not going to happen overnight, but it will happen when you say that this may take 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 years. And I've been in this country for a bit over 10 years, and I had no idea, Matt, that I'd be doing this 10 years later. So a lot can happen in a short period of time if you apply the right mindset to it.
Amazing. Well, Reed, thank you so much for coming on the show. If you're listening right now and you want to get in on a exclusive live Q&A session with guests like Reed Goossens, Brian Burke, Gino Barbaro, and all the other real estate operators that are doing the big deals out there, definitely be sure to check out the Go Big Live Real Estate Investors Group on Facebook. And we'll catch you up on the next live interview. So thanks very much, Reed, and thanks for tuning in.